a really nice sort of spontaneity to it. Will Call used to get that in his routes and so forth, in the way that you deal with the fur. It's just got a really nice looseness, and somehow it has a sense of grouping. The contrast is you have, nice, short, long, sticking out amongst a lower group, and out like this. And there's ways that you can do fur, like hair, so that it doesn't look like a banana or it doesn't look like a spike. Like there's nothing worse than getting these spike effects. But you really have to start to treat it in a sort of a subconscious way, but consciously thinking about how the groupings are. Now, a lot of the worst effects that you can see is when you get into a shape that is just, everything is even like this, or something like that. Even that's got contrast to it. But and then the worst case scenario is Don Bluth, where you actually have this sort of bananas going around, which is interesting. But the best situation you can get to, which is actually, they started working with that, is where you actually have a shape that you're working with, and you can even use the Pinocchio shape, that you actually have a mass of hair, and then you try to create a sense of gravity, for instance. You start to maybe create that there's a weight on top, and then you start to break up into the shape so that you actually have a little bit of variety. Trying to keep it loose so that you actually have something that has a density to it. And since we're going to be trying to work with the dog to have a characteristic that wolves have, which is this sort of funny shape underneath the neck, we want to be careful that it doesn't. We want to be careful that we understand that this is, in fact, that the neck is going well inside here. It's like when you see a wet cat. I mean, you're really amazed how the structure is, how incredibly tight the structure of a cat is, and this fur is just, giving it a completely different illusion. So, and we also want to think in terms of what is the direction of the flow of the hair. So we want to make sure that we're defining the direction. So how far you cut into the fur at certain points is going to really give the audience a definition of, well, what is this? This is a scraggly, long clump of fur at the bottom, as well as here, we're defining the scapula. We're saying that this is going to be sort of almost like a. But you see what I'm doing? I'm almost winging it. There's almost not a rule, because it's sort of something there is a rule that it has to be appealing to look at, and it has to suggest that it's connected to somewhere, and that there's a grouping, and there's certain breaking points there. And so it's a very good experiment to sort of do this, to sort of play with things, try to create some kind of, curves or things that will give you groupings, and then as you get into the tightening the drawing, to try to create variations, avoiding the point so that it doesn't become so clumpy that when they paint it, it looks like that, but at the same time, not spiky, so that you're getting into this situation. The tail, also, as we get into that, will be bending down. I think, and this is also suggested by Carlos, is that I think we're going to, like a wolf, we're going to be taking this off the paper. We're going to be taking the tail from the hind quarter, for instance, here, and we're going to be probably. You have to always imagine that the tail is of course, without the fur, is a certain length as it gets into the hind quarter. I mean, it's back in here like this. And that this fur is growing and hanging down into that sort of way, into the direction of the tail itself. Now, as you start to get into that, as I just did that, I start to see groupings. I might have a few loose ones here. I can pull these together. I can grab this together, create a contrast, and maybe keep this long and then break it up in here. But if you got a shot where your tail is going to be, it's going to be obvious, it's going to be sticking out like a massive area. So, if you're not careful, that thing can be distracting in either the movement or in the way that you design the shape of the tail. And all dogs go to heaven is a classic example of this bizarre thing sticking on his ass. Sometimes it's going like this or back or flipping and going into these weird shapes and not necessarily in connection with the thought process of the character. The same thing happens, of course, again, you got the emotional element because you have, this thing the thing can move back, it can come back forward at you and so forth. So you've got a lot of possibilities here for expression, as well as, for me personally, I think that if there's a wolf dog, he's not a delicate thing. He's not been taken care of by any owners. He's probably fairly scraggly. So I would think that, if you can break it up a little bit and make it sort of dirty or something, it would give it a personality that would be. But thinking in terms of that there is a weight process here, that the fur is actually, coming from this thing, and even growing on top, for instance, you can have a fur coming down on either side from this sort of, hose-looking thing.